Welcome to the Bogart Effect, a wealthy wisdom podcast. The following Bogart Effect podcast is intended for general information purposes only. The information discussed is no substitute for personalized investment advice from Bogart or another investment professional. Please see important disclosure information at the end of the presentation. All right, good morning. Today I've got Nell Cordick with me, and we're going to talk a little bit about what happens if your advisor changes. And Nell, I thought you were perfectly suited for this. You've been in the industry now for 3 decades?
Close.
So a lot of perspective on transitions that have happened. Mm-hmm. You've had different transitions within your career in past life, and I think now have found the perfect role for you.
Absolutely.
But, really, I wanted to have the conversation of what does it look like? What does really a successful advisory firm structure look like from a client service perspective? And then talk a little bit about if you're with another firm, what does it look like in terms of the transition there? The reality of it is the average age of advisor in the industry now is 59 years old. I mean, it's getting up there. And, I jokingly will say that we're at this human capital crisis. 2008, 2009, culled the financial services industry simply because if an advisor wasn't performing at the top levels, they got fired because of the great financial crisis. And then for the next 5 years, there weren't any training programs at any of the wirehouses. So I know, speaking about Bogart Wealth, we've got this huge gap in terms of demographics that we're trying to fill. I call them unicorns, which is the advisors that's in their 30s to mid 40s, because there's really not a whole lot of them. And that to me is why the industry age is progressing as such. And it's not that the new generation of advisors aren't effective or great advisors, but there is an experience gap that still needs to be filled. So let's talk a little bit about what happens when an advisor changes?
Absolutely. I think you first have to look at what are the reasons that you might experience an advisor change. And there could be a myriad of reasons. And to think about, it could be that an advisor is retiring, to simply what you're talking about, that they are aging out and they're retiring. Could also be, depending on the situation, they may be gaining a promotion. They also may have grown their book to an extent that they're building out a team with other advisors. So there could be a lot of reasons for the transition. But number one, I think you always, the main focus is for the client to always feel like their new advisor is their advocate. That is the most critical thing. And I think when you're thinking about building out or having our firm in particular, when we do transition a client, we really want to make sure the client is fully understanding that the advisor is changing, but the things that are there that involve the client specifically, their investment plan, their financial plan, their cash flow plan is not changing. That is staying steady. And it's a matter of what is changing is the relationship and the person that is their key point of contact and their key advocate.
Well, and you've mentioned the word twice, and I want to emphasize advocate, right? And I'll discuss Bogart Wealth first, right? Ultimately, we have built a firm, or part of our culture is built around redundancy, systems, processes. None of those ever change with regards to the relationship itself. Okay. The primary advocate who's working on your behalf is ultimately, if there is a transition that's happened, and truthfully, we've had a lot of the clients that where I was the primary initially have transitioned over to a new advocate. And the reality for it is because I think of a sword, right? And when a sword is constantly being sharpened or used, it's very, very effective. If ultimately it's not being used as much, because we'll use me, right? Where I'm getting pulled in different directions to be able to manage the firm. Well, it's not as sharp. And I think about somebody who's doing it day in and day out. They're so much more effective. Not that I'm going anywhere. I haven't gone anywhere, and I'm still the advocate for every client in the firm. I'm an example of one of when you talk about promotion, right? I don't know if I'd say it was a promotion, right? But the reality of it is I haven't gone anywhere, and there are still clients. I love interacting with our clients. That part is probably the hardest part of the transitions that I've had. But the reality of it is I know for a fact any one of the clients that has a new advocate for them, they're actually being served better than when I was doing it, simply because I was getting pulled in so many directions. And I think that it's really important to emphasize that advocacy conversation, but also emphasize everything that the firm represents, nothing has changed.
That's right.
We are a very process-driven firm, and frankly, we've grown. And because of our growth, we've been able to do more for our clients. We've been able to add new team members. We've been able to add new services. And that, to me, is a very important part of the discussion of what is the value proposition of having an advisor. I think a lot of clients ask us, I've retired. You were great in transitioning me. Now, what is the value? And for example, with Bogart Wealth, our value is the integration of financial planning. It's the investment management. It's all the tax work we do. It's all the estate planning work we do. It's all the trust work we do. And we're continuing to expand those services. But when I think of us versus other firms, like if you only had one advisor that might have an admin, well, there's a lot of risk there. And to me, I think there's significant value in having a team where it's not just one person that's doing one element of the process. We've built out the ensemble so that ultimately we're adding value beyond just planning or just investments, et cetera.
And I think that is a very key point, is our entire process is built on the investment management, the cash flow, the financial plan process is already in place. And the advisor, it's not just one person looking at your accounts. They might be the one person talking with you, but there are other people behind the scenes. And even if an advisor transitions, nothing changes with regard to your situation. And your goals are still very much of the utmost importance and the priority. And that is the key.
I mean, what we do, we're a service industry, right? And it is very relationship driven.
That's right.
And frankly, I look at it in the context of the client has to be very comfortable with the advocate that they're working with. I think, we've talked about this internally, but the communicational side of what we do is at the epicenter of a lot of what are these conversations. So I think of, as we've done the transitions internally well, you beat on me with some of my clients. The thing is it all comes back to this value creation exercise. The firm creates value, but at the end of the day, each and every advisor is creating values on a daily basis because they are the microphone. They're the advocate. They're working on the client's behalf. Every single conversation we have with our clients, we're making a promise. It's a promise to follow up. It's a promise to stay committed. It's a promise to adhering to our core values. And I look at it in the sense of whenever I finish a call, you finish a call, any one of the advisors finishes a call, we always have our proverbial homework, the things that we're going to be doing for you between now and the next iteration that we talk.
That's right.
And that's an ongoing and constantly evolving discussion that's happened along the way.
And I think one key thing regarding that is during any transition, regardless of the reason, the communication is the key component. And it has to go both ways. You as the client need to be very comfortable actually asking questions of the new advisor and vice versa. I think sometimes during a transition, the most effective thing is the new advisor to go through an entire financial planning update with a new client, to go through a risk tolerance discussion, and also to go through a cash flow discussion, because those are the key things that are so critical initially, and other things can be built out. But on the reverse, it's also the personal piece matters. We want to know your family.
The most.
And that's absolutely. But it's just as important that you, the client, knows the personal part of the advisor too. It becomes, I would say with all of my clients, it becomes a friendship. It is not just a business relationship. You get to know when an important event, a graduation or something, a wedding, super exciting happens. But you also, in terms of some of the sad events, the advisor is very in tune too. So that personal connection is truly key. And it does take time to build that with the new advisor. But the key thing is the communication is how that's built.
I can't emphasize that enough. This morning I got the unfortunate email that a client's parent had died, but they felt, and we're not working with the client, right? But it's just, there was such an impactful life event that had happened that they felt that we were that close to them to be able to come to us and share. And of course, there's an emotional element to that conversation, and candidly, there's also going to be a financial element to that conversation, which we'll address when the timing is right for that. We've talked a little bit about communication. We've talked a little bit about the experience within Bogart Wealth clients, I'd like to, let's just beat on our competition a little bit. The average industry advisor, it's a person with an assistant. They might have 2 or 3 people that are supporting them, but it's not a 40 plus person ensemble like a firm like ours. And I think about the industry demographics constantly. I think about the fact that advisors are aging. And I will admit, this is an industry where you can work well into your 70s. Now, I'm going to argue that at some point, other things become more important, right? It's grandkids, it's retirement, it's and becoming less and less and less available. I'm also going to argue at some point effectiveness. I'm trying to be delicate with the word choice, but mental competencies start to come into question. And this is why I think about how we've built the firm, and it's with that redundancy. So I think of every core advisor, lead advisor in the firm. They've got the support behind them. We're building the next generation for, let's just think of the next 3 to 7 years, because they need the experience as well. It gives that natural redundancy in there. But let's talk a little bit about you're working at another firm or with an advisor at another firm, and that advisor decides to retire. What should that experience look like?
So I think a couple of things also. It may be not only just that the advisor may retire, but there also may be a life event in your life that causes you to think, can they handle everything that I have going on? So look at it from both perspectives. So how does that really, work in terms of that? First, you want to, at any stage, just like anything else that you're doing in your life, when you're making major decisions, you want to investigate what are the other possibilities out there. And in terms of our firm, and I would say any other firm that would be in my consideration reputable, is absolutely you want to have an interview with that firm and seek to understand, what do they do that's different? What will they do that enhances your financial situation? What is it that they can do to add value? And really understand, and then that gives you an absolute comparison on staying with your existing, if you're going to be changing advisors regardless, then you can compare and contrast what is the value you're going to get from staying versus what would be the value that you'd get from changing. And it's really to ask, what are you offering me? And what is your plan for my particular financial future?
Yeah, I want to emphasize. So we did 2 other podcasts on these related topics. One I did with Jung about how to select an advisor.
Correct.
Great podcast for anybody who's actually in that process. And then the other one is, what is the value creation mechanism? And I can't make light of that statement,
Absolutely.
Right? Because the reality of it is not every advisor is the same. The service offering is not the same. The redundancies is not the same. The value exercise is not the same. So I think if you're going to go through the process, understanding that what that firm is, how they're being compensated, right? Are they true fiduciaries? Are they not? And then frankly, I can't make light of it enough. What is their succession plan? I think back to, and you have your experience from previous firms, I have my experience from previous firms, but when I was at previous firms, if an advisor retires, they just picked whoever was the next up that had some capacity and asked them, do you want to buy my book? The firm would help pay for it.
That's right.
And boom, next thing you know, you're getting moved to John Smith, who
may or may not have your expertise,
qualifications, planning background, personality, you name it.
That's right.
And that's a very much a voluntold type of discussion. And that's a great opportunity to go through this exercise saying, is this the right advisor for me? Is it time to make a change?
That's right.
I think of Bogart Wealth, obviously we're biased, I know that. But I come back to, we built the firm ultimately that how we would want to be serviced ourselves.
Absolutely.
And part of it would be, planning, right? And the industry shifting, right? You look at 10 years ago, planning was something that was given away in order to be able to get the investment management. I'm arguing now there's kind of an inversion that's now happening where you are really commoditizing investment management in order to be able to get the planning, the tax, the estate planning, trust work, et cetera. And I think that transition is going to continue to happen. It's harder to differentiate on the investment side than it used to be. And I think about, the growing needs of our customer base and where they perceive value. well, it's not just one thing
Not at
anymore.
all.
And if the advisor that you're working with is just doing one thing, or they're clearly leading with one thing, like for example, I had a colleague recently. He's like, well, all he does is sell me insurance. Okay, well, is he an insurance salesman? Like, is he really an investment manager or really a financial planner? I'm going to argue probably not, right? And that comes back to the interfacing that you have and the advocacy.
And I think that's where Bogart Wealth is unique in terms of our holistic view of the client. And we absolutely want to be able to talk about everything that happens in a client's financial life. And not one thing is necessarily more important. There are going to be times where things are prioritized, but it's important to have an advisor that really can understand your entire picture and help you navigate with the right decisions that truly are in your best interest.
Well, and honestly, I would also say that integrates your family.
Correct.
It's an opt-in, right?
Absolutely.
You may or may not want your kids, but I think I'll use myself, right? My family is the epicenter of these discussions.
Absolutely.
And I think about my kids and the impact of the decisions I have now on my kids. And so frankly, part of our mission as a firm is intergenerational wealth, which is your parents and your children, because they all have a direct impact on our own respective situations.
And you need to be able to think about what those possible effects could be. They may not be happening today, but you already want to be formulating your plan of action if certain circumstances occur, because then you're much better equipped to make the right decision as well.
Well, let's use one life event, a long-term care trigger, right? Like that's obviously emotional, but it's also very, very financial.
Absolutely.
And that's a great example where when you build out your planning, you might be in your 50s or early 60s, healthy as can be. But if you're not thinking forward on that, I mean, candidly, that can have a very meaningful economic impact.
Absolutely.
Let's also talk about taxes, right?
Yes.
Like the decisions that we're making with regards to tax strategy, that's not something that's in your best interest today. Frankly, in most instances, it's actually not in your best interest today because it means we got to pay a little bit more tax. But it's because we're looking at the future and the future implications of those decisions that we're going to be in a much, much higher tax bracket that we're trying to manage while we're in a lower bracket now. As examples, right? So
that's exactly right.
I think, bringing it back to this conversation, the reality of it is we have an aging demographic within the financial advisory space. I think the importance is that any advisor that you're working with needs to have a team. Again, we're biased, but that is the perspective, and I think that's the way the industry is working. If you're working with one person and the conversation of succession comes up, and I actually really, really encourage a client to ask us, what is the succession plan of the firm? If you've asked your advisor, hey, who's behind you or what happens if something happens to you, and they don't have a good answer, well, frankly, that's not a good option. I know I'm biased, but for years, clients love the fact that I'm as young as I am. I'm one of the youngest CEOs in the industry, and the reality of it, well, I should say in the industry at a firm this size. But the reality of it is that we're in an environment where that human capital crisis is only getting worse. Advisors, the average age is only continuing to get higher and higher and higher. The next generation, they're great, but they need some more experience, right? So this is where that fine balance of having that team ensemble is really, really important. But I'm going to come back to that word of advocacy.
Correct.
What else today?
Well, regarding that team, I think that's a critical component also. It's not just having the team, but it's how the team is being developed and how are they being exposed to complex financial situations. And I think that's one of the things, again, I think that's very unique with what we are doing. And I've worked for lots of different firms, and we are very unique in that we are developing our younger generation to very quickly have exposure to more complex financial situations. And that is going to give them more confidence, more experience in dealing with those with their clients over time.
Well, and most importantly, they have other resources within the firm.
That's right.
To be able to build off of, advocate, or ask questions to. I mean, frankly, look at our lead advisors. There's not a week that goes by where a lead advisor doesn't ask a question that's impacting one of their clients, that then all of a sudden they have the combined resources of the entire firm to be able to lean into that as they need to.
That's right.
This is a great discussion, and I think we could probably spend another hour or so diving into it. But the reality of it is, I think financial literacy is at the epicenter of these conversations, all of these conversations. That's the whole point of the Bogart effect. I think the reality of it is that the industry is continuing to shift in a manner that it's really important to ask the fundamental questions around what value is actually being created. And I'll emphasize this: if a client only sees the value of an advisor in managing their money, to me, there's not a whole lot of value there. There's just so many options now, and if cost is the only discussion point, then yeah, we should look at some low cost options and just set it up and leave it alone. From my perspective, the real value of having an advisor and having an advisory firm is the services that coincide with that. Everything from, again, the financial planning, the investment management, the tax optimization, estate planning work, any type of trust work that needs to be done. All of that needs to be integrated for you.
Absolutely. It cannot be siloed. If it's siloed, something will get missed in your financial picture.
Let's use any one of these representative, like your CPA. If your CPA is not talking to your advisor, we got problems, right? If your state attorney is not talking to your advisor, or ultimately you go through the exercise and you generate all the estate documents, but then don't change any of the titling, well, what was the point of going through the estate planning work?
Exactly.
So it has to be integrated and interfaced. And that's why I believe a very good and empowering advisor is the one that is going to ultimately quarterback all of those life events as they continue to happen.
Exactly.
Because it's not just 1 year, right? It's an organic element that continues to change year over year over year. And frankly, family components to it continue to change every single year. Right?
And life happens. And that's the key, is you want an advisor that's going to be with you looking at all of those events as life happens.
Bingo. Nell, thanks for the time today.
Thank
really
you.
appreciate
Enjoyed
it. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. The previous podcast was intended for general information purposes only. The information discussed is no substitute for personalized investment advice from Bogart or another investment professional. Different types of investments involve varying degrees of risk, and it should not be assumed that the future performance of any specific investment, strategy, or service will be profitable, suitable, or successful. Bogart is not a law firm or accounting firm, and no portion of its services should be construed as legal or accounting advice. There is no guarantee a client will experience a certain level of results if Bogart is engaged. Our brochure describing services and fees can be found at www.bogartwealth.com.